So now we're going to be talking about the lower body, especially the pelvis. And here I have a life-size model of an adult human pelvis. And the first thing you see is how big and massive it is, massive bones. And it's attached on the rear side to our glutes or butt, massive muscles. And down below with our legs, these are the femurs going into the pelvis. We have our thighs and our quads, massive muscles. And then here, going up our lower part of our spine, we have the core of our body, massive muscles. So this is the central transmission point and acceleration point for energy moving up from the ground into our upper body. But, why don't we see more about training the pelvis? I can't remember a tennis video instruction that even mentions the word pelvis in the title. I think this is the first, and that's fine. So why don't we hear more about pelvis and pelvis training? Well, there's a couple major reasons. One is a cultural bias against thinking about the pelvic area. In our culture, it's generally associated with something dirty and something offensive in some way. So we tend to avoid looking at it and talking about it and using it, really. The famous dance teacher, Irmgard Bartiev, called that the space here, between in our pelvis, the dead 7 inches, is that the trained athletes and dancers who came to her to be trained, when she first looked at them, they had no skill and no movement, athletic movement in their pelvis area. So what are the implications of that? So I've said in the past that the kinetic chain that powers the modern swing has 32 rotating segments from the bottom of our feet all the way out to our fingers. And I said that traditional tennis only focuses mostly on the arm. So there's 5 segments here: the shoulder, the elbow, the wrist, the hand, and the fingers all have different elements and speeds of rotation that we put to use if we're good. And the only other segment that gets any attention in traditional tennis is the feet. Oh yeah, you got to have good footwork and training exercise on footwork, which is all true. So that's 5 segments in the arm and 1 segment on the foot. Let's say that's 6 segments. But there are 32 segments in the kinetic chain. So I would say that we have a dead 26 segments in tennis instruction and tennis thinking. We don't give it any thought. We don't train them athletically. We don't train them skillfully. One of the things I admire most about Novak Djokovic, and one of the reasons I think he's won more Grand Slams than any player in history, is that he systematically trained his whole body. When he first came out, as you remember, he had terrible footwork. He couldn't approach the net. He couldn't volley. He couldn't serve. A whole bunch of things. Well, but he systematically went through and fixed all those things and, turned into, this Superman of tennis. I think there's a good contrast with American tennis, which we haven't had a Grand Slam winner since, 20 years ago with Andy Roddick. And I'll say one more philosophic thing about this idea is I've said in the past that the kind of training that I'm recommending and the path that you pursue can kind of change your life. It's not just about swinging a tennis racket. Well, what did I mean? Well, I talked about how, if we start to gain skill in these different areas of our body that we didn't have before, we sort of activate them. They were dead and now they're alive and now they're skillful and now they're efficient. And that makes us feel good, intrinsically makes us feel alive. And, I've also talked about how, the contact is the zen of contact, is that we work with the laws of physics, which I talk about a lot, of course, even today with the ski boat and angular momentum and centrifugal force. If we work with those laws instead of against them, we're going to be better and enjoy our sport at a much higher level instead of always fighting against the laws of physics. So learning about this path, it can change your life, and kind of reawakening of a lot of different things. And I'll leave the religious note there at the end, but give it some thought.